Hey, and welcome back. So whenever I took the lathe apart, I found this inside of the saddle and I wasn't quite sure what it was all about. I just kept it, and then I realized that someone had made that first bolt there, and it was because that one had broken. So the second one is the original bolt, and of course I need to make another bolt because the one that someone made I'm just not happy with. It's very thin and it's not welded very well. So I wound up making a hex into a square. I don't have any collet blocks, so making a square with this setup was a little bit of a challenge, but I managed to get it done. It didn't turn out bad, and I will probably revisit it at another time, but for now it's good enough. And I did turn down the shoulder there under the head with the lathe. This is the crossfeed screw and the bushing that attaches it to the saddle. Since my lathe has a taper attachment, it has that additional tab there to locate it onto the taper attachment. And this is the same configuration on a non-taper attachment lathe. It would just not have that tab. Just getting the bushing adjustment dialed in there, and yeah, I know I'm not supposed to do that, but hey, I don't have a wrench that thin. This shaft is what drives the crossfeed screw, and it doesn't show anything about putting grease on it on the lube chart, but when I took it apart, it had grease on it. That is a 1/16 roll pin that acts as a stop for this way cover, and it's indexed into the saddle and into the slide with notches. I'm really happy with how sensitive this gib is to adjustment. Just the finest amount of adjustment and it will lock it down just on one screw. My south bend is nowhere near that good. That's the oil hole in the crossfeed nut next to that screw. When everything's together, the crossfeed nut blocks the access hole for the compound bolts and they won't fall out. So I just thought that this felt really smooth until later, whenever it really is smooth. But believe it or not, it wasn't stuck, didn't feel notchy. I mean, it was serviceable in a usable condition, well, except for the fact that you couldn't really mount it. I've revisited the spindle adjustment and thoroughly lubricated the front bearing and got the adjustment really dialed in. And you can see that it's about 2/10-ish. I don't think the chuck actually contacts the nose of the spindle whenever it's installed, but hey, I thought why not? I'll measure it while I'm there, and it's really insignificant, I believe. The lock ring for the chuck turned out surprisingly well with just a little bit of wire brushing by hand, no Scotch-Brite, and no power tools, just by hand. I'm indicating off of the chuck backplate just to show that it's straight and give reference to the fact that the spindle is straight and the backplate is straight, but, well, my piece of material is definitely not straight. And this chuck is 3-jaw, but it is adjustable. And with a different piece of material, you can see that I have a different reading. So I just did this before I took the chuck apart so that I have some reference. And there is the adjustment points for adjusting the chuck on the back plate. And the first one is numbered, the second one is not. That's number 3 and number 4. The chuck jaws are also numbered on the end of the jaws, and on the face just under the jaw you can make out the number in the shadow there. There is a small lip on the inside of the chuck, and that's the only way that I can see to separate the two halves, as it is stuck together, and I don't have anything that is the right size except for this hardened bushing, which is a little bit oversized. So I faced it just enough to be able to get a lip around the edge of it that was all the same plane, and trimmed it down just enough to be able to slide it inside and use it as a removal tool. I use mineral spirits for the initial grunge removal, and then once I've got it pretty well clean, I switch over to acetone, and that will remove all of the residue that's on the part. And when you think it's clean, clean it up and do it one more time, and then it'll be clean. Acetone, comparative to something like, say, brake clean, is very cost effective. In order to make the adjustment on the chuck, these outside bolts must be seated fully and then backed off and then just snug in order to be able to shift the chuck and get it indicated in. And after final adjustment, you should also leave your indicator in place and tighten those bolts very evenly and watch your indicator and make sure that you're not causing any kind of shift or misalignment. Okay, so now it's really smooth. Okay, so if you haven't figured it out yet, I don't have the chuck key. And of course it's 5/16, so I can't just grab any old extension or driver in my toolbox to make it work because, well, it's 5/16. This can be a very time-consuming process. Fortunately, with the VFD, I can set the lathe on super slow-mo and I can actually see what's happening whenever it's rotating, and I don't have to spin it around by hand a zillion times, so it makes it a little bit easier to do this. Hey, sorry I get my head in the way a few times here, but I've got to see the indicator also. Hey, don't forget to snug up those bolts in the face. So in all the testing that I did, I kept coming back to this one piece of material because it seemed to be the most consistent for me. And you can see that I keep changing the jaws, just opening and closing, and I actually changed the material a couple of times just to see what repeatability is like. My conclusion was that this is very consistent and appears to be very accurate, and I'm very happy. Thanks for watching.